was the daughter of one of the great wives of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. As such, she became his stepdaughter and also one of his most prized students. Join Sunnah followers Ustada Lailanasheeba as we discuss the story of Zaynab bint Abu Salamah radiyallahu anhu. Alhamdulillah wa salam ala wa rasulullah. Welcome to our series on the heroines of Islam. This is our series of the heroines of Islam, and in this series, what I'm doing is speaking about the different companions, the female companions of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We covered the wives of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and we've covered his biological daughters. But what a lot of Muslim women do not know is that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam also had stepchildren that he was responsible for. And one of the stepchildren that I'm going to speak about today is Zaynab radiyallahu anha. Zaynab, who was the daughter of Abu Salamah. She was the daughter of Salamah radiyallahu anha. And when the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam married Salamah, he played a great role in the life of Zaynab because Zaynab became one of his best students. So let's review her life. And her life is not that complicated, not that long. As Mukhtar was saying, when we do the history of these companions, a lot of people ask, why is it that there's not a lot of detail about them? I'm going to tell you why. Because Allah did not want us to do to these companions what the Christians did to their righteous men and women. Allah did not want us to do what the people of Noah did. They took the righteous men who died and made them people of worship. Y'all understand that? That's one of the questions that one of y'all asked today. Why is it that not much detail is given about what happened? We don't know if a lot of these companions, well, I can tell you the woman that we talked about earlier, she did remarry. And I'm going to tell you why, because back in those days, this was the medieval period. In the medieval period, a woman, had no one to protect her but a husband. So you're not going to find that many women back then who just were single, okay? That woman that we talked about, she did remarry. In fact, she remarried several times. But the reason why there's not much elaboration, we just speak about, as my cousin Mukhtar was telling you, we speak about what needs to be said about them. And we don't go off into more because people will tend to worship you. That's what they did. The people, shirk began. When did associating partners with Allah begin? It began during the time of Noah, alayhi salam. When those three righteous men died, the people allowed Shaitan to come to them and get them to build statues. Then he came to them and got them to commemorate these men and worship these men and eulogize them. Then he got them to start talking to them. Okay. And that's also why a lot of you, most of these original companions were buried in El Baqi. But there were some who were buried in other parts of the world, and their graves are not known. Nobody knows for sure where, because Allah kept all that stuff hidden from us, because he did not want us to do the same thing the Christians did and make people saints. He didn't want us to make these companions saints. That's why we cannot even give you the definite date of birth of any of these companions. Nobody knows exactly when the prophet was born. Nobody knows exactly when any of these female or male companions were born. Allah kept it that way, so we wouldn't do what the Christians did with the birthdays, but yet and still Muslims are doing it. Okay, so that's why not much information. You know, in Islam, we talk about what needs to be said about that person, and then we keep it moving, because the only one worthy of worship is Allah. And that's the foundation of Islam. Islam is based upon La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, and Tawheed. La ilaha illallah is the number one pillar. We don't worship no one, not even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's why a lot of elaboration is not given in these hadith books. Although if you're a person that study the hadith, you can find out a whole lot more, like what I'm doing with you guys. I'm giving you guys a lot of information, you know, that you ain't gonna get in no book that you buy at the store called The Ladies of the Prophet, Around the Prophet. I'm giving y'all more information because I got some scholars working with me who know the Arabic. There's more in Arabic than there is in English about them, who's provided me with more information for you guys. But again, even with that, we're just touching on what needs to be said, what needs to be known, because otherwise the Muslims would do the same thing the Jews and Christians did. You'd start worshiping these companions. You would start making them out to be saints and all of that crap. The Virgin Mary, you'll be doing all that stuff. That shows how Allah perfected this deen for us. Does everybody understand? So I want y'all, when we're telling you, when me and my cousin are going over the stories, because this is our thing, it's history. We were raised upon these companions. We were taught as children to idolize them. We were taught as children to make these companions our role models to live up to. But we were also taught everything is in balance. We don't worship them. That they were not perfect. They made mistakes just like you and me. We learn from their mistakes, grow from their knowledge, but we don't worship them. We don't put them on a level higher than what they are on. And that's also, again, the reason why Umar, radiallahu anha, fired Khalid bin Walid, the young brother here. I know a lot of you young brothers love the story to hear about Khalid bin Walid. And maybe my cousin Mukhtar will give y'all his story. But why did Umar remove him? It wasn't just because of the question about his wife, Layla, who was married to Malik. But also Umar told him, I'm not firing you because of that. Because only you know what happened between you and Malik. He said, I'm firing you as the general because the people are attributing all the victories to you. He said the children walk up and down the streets of Medina calling out your name, saying victory to you instead of victory to Allah. He said, so that's why I am firing you and removing you of your duties as general of the Muslim army. He said, because the people are making you out, Khalid, to be more than what you are. This hadith is authentic. So that's why, Islam protected, Allah protected us from doing this stuff. He made it hard for us to put these men and women on levels higher than what they should be by keeping certain things hidden, unless you really, really dig. And even if you really dig, you got to dig with knowledge. You got to know what to look for. Okay? All right, so let's go into the story of Zaynab, radiallahu anha, who was the stepdaughter of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And again, not much is given about her either. But everything that I am giving you, in fact, when I put her story together, I didn't use a book for this, except for Bukhari, Muslim, Muwatta. I used the hadith books to gather all this information. This is what I was up doing all day. I've been up since the morning. So everything that I've got put together for you about her is taken directly from the authentic hadith, from Sahih Bukhari, from Sahih Muslim, from Muwatta. Okay, mainly those three. So let's put the PowerPoint up on the screen. All right. Oh, wait a minute. Y'all see it on my screen? I got so much on my screen. Is this? Oh, here it is. I was going to say, here it is. Where is it at on my screen? All right, there it is. Uh-oh. Wait a minute. What's this? Oh, that's me? Okay. Wait a minute. Wait, let me take this down so I can fix my screen. Lord have mercy. See, I do so much streaming. It's just hard for me to... I don't have the help these brothers have. Hold on for a second. Okay, here we go. Let me put it over here. I just finished up. I put another hadith in here right before class. Wait a minute. Okay, so tonight, inshallah, we're going to do the story of Zaynab bint Abu Salamah. Zaynab, the daughter of Abu Salamah. And by the way, that's also why there are no pictures of any of these companions. Because again, Allah closed the door to us making the same mistakes that the Christians and Jews did by idolizing, worshiping people. So when you guys see me make my videos, I just take pictures of Muslim women from around the world. I am not trying to duplicate any of these companions because I could never duplicate them, number one. But number two, I know that in order to get the dawah out effectively as a communication specialist, and that's what my degree is in, I am a communication specialist. Okay? I know that the best way to convey any message is by using as many of the human senses as we can: taste, feel, sight. So what I do, as you guys see, I just gather pictures of Muslim women from around the world. I do it for several reasons. The number one reason, besides stimulating your attention and capturing it, is because I want you to see how Muslim women are supposed to dress. That's the number one. We have to start dressing properly with our khimars. Okay? And also, I pick women from different parts of the world to show our diversity, how diverse we are as a nation. We're not based on race or any of that type of tribalism. It's all about la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. So for the brothers out there, I have some young children. You're considered a child to me. You may be 30 years old. I'm 62. I'm your great grandmother. I know my deen. I think a little better than you. I'm not trying to duplicate any companion. I am a da'iyah trying to convey a message of the truth to the best of my ability to capture your heart, stimulate your brain, and hopefully instill something in it that will penetrate your heart and show through your limbs, my brothers. Be careful. Looks are very deceiving. I am not 20. I'm 62. All right, let's get to it. So we're going to do the story of Zaynab bint Abu Salamah. Zaynab, radiyallahu anha, is the daughter of Salamah. Her father was Abu Salamah Abdullah. And after what happened to him, we know what happened. We talked about the story of Salamah, her life. Like I told you, sisters, we complain about our personal lives. Salamah's life was a life of misery and more sacrifice than anything. She lost her husband, and her child was taken away from her. Then when she was reunited with her husband, Abu Salamah, he ended up being killed during one of the battles. Okay? The Battle of Badr. After the demise of Abu Salamah, radiyallahu anha, that's when the Salamah was approached by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She felt that there was no man on this earth better than Abu Salamah who could serve as a husband to her and a father to her children. And that's when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam approached her after her mourning period. A woman mourns for 4 months and 10 days. After her mourning period, the Prophet of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam approached her and offered to marry her. He said, there is someone better than Abu Salamah. He said, me. And she was surprised. She said, but I got 2 issues. She said, number 1, I'm a very jealous woman. I am extremely jealous. She said, number 2, I have children. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told her, in regards to your jealousy, I will make dua asking Allah to remove all of that female drama from your heart, which Allah did. Salamah became his refuge. Okay. He said it in regards to your children. He said, your children are my children because Abu Salamah was my foster brother. I am their foster uncle. So they're my children. And so she married the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Zaynab was a young girl at that time, guys. Zaynab was born in Abyssinia. Her original name was Berra. Remember, I told you Berra was a very, very popular Arabic name, but it had a bad meaning. Not a bad meaning, but we should never name ourselves names that are hard to live up to. So every woman, it seems, that was named Berra, the Prophet changed their name to Zaynab. Okay? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam changed her name to Zaynab. And so thus, he became a stepfather to her and her brothers. Whenever the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would come to Salamah's house, the first thing he would do was ask for Zaynab because she was around, I'd say around 10. She was extremely smart, extremely beautiful. And the Prophet loved her. He would play with her. In fact, her uncle Ammar used to say, Zaynab was the one who has come between the Prophet and the rest of his family. What does that mean? That means that, subhanallah, the Prophet loved her as much as he did his for his real blooded children. He loved her as much as he did Fatima. He had loved her just as much as he did Ali, who was his cousin. So he made her part of the family. And he recognized at her young age how gifted she was. Remember, the Arabs were not an educated people, meaning, reading and writing. Out of all the prophet's wives, Hafsa is the only wife of the prophet that is recorded as being able to read and write. How many of you knew that? Even Aisha, radiallahu anha, could not read. She could not write. But Aisha had a photographic memory. She could memorize anything. She could hear something once and never forget it. Well, just like Aisha, radiallahu anha, was gifted with that, so was Zaynab. Zaynab had a memory. She could hear the prophet recite a verse of the Quran and she could pick it right up. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam recognized her quick brain, and she became one of his best students. In fact, Anas ibn Malik, who was another kid that grew up in the home of the Prophet, he said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would play with Zaynab. And when he would come to her house, the first thing he would do is say, Zaynab, oh, Zaynab, where's Zaynab? And she'd come running to him. Remember, we talked about how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so attached to her that even Aisha became jealous. Now, remember, Aisha was around 12, 13 years old when he married Salamah. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam married Salamah, Aisha was around 13, maybe 14 at the most. Zaynab was like 10, 11. She wasn't much younger than Aisha. Aisha was jealous of her and the time that the Prophet spent with her because she had that brain like Aisha. Remember, Aisha, radiallahu anha, was so jealous that she started a fitna. Remember, one time the Prophet went to visit Salamah, but he spent it was during the daytime. He would go visit all his wives after Asr. After Asr, he would make his rounds to visit every wife. And it was not sex like a lot of you thought. You read that authentic hadith in Bukhari, where narrated by Anas, who was another kid. Anas said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would make rounds with all his wives in one night. He saw this. He was a kid, like 7, 8 years old. But people read that hadith and think that meant that the Prophet had sex. No. When Anas told the people that, one of the companions said, how did he, have relations with them all in one night? And Anas said the Prophet had the strength of 100 men. When Aisha heard this, she said, wait a minute. Remember, Aisha was the one that checked the male companions on that stuff. She said the Prophet made rounds with all his wives, but he didn't have sex with them. She said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never had sex with a wife if it was not her night. That hadith is authentic. It's Bukhari too. So that's why I say when you learn these hadiths, there's an art to that. You have to study from the people of knowledge. You cannot teach yourself this deen. I didn't teach myself. I learned these hadiths from the true scholars of hadiths. Okay. And that hadith was explaining it. I said, oh, it makes so much sense. And it's right there in Bukhari. Aisha said, yes, the Prophet every day, if he was not in a battle, in a war, after Asr, he'd pray Asr at the mosque, and he would come to each wife and check on us. He would start with the oldest, who was Sauda. And then whoever's night it was, he would save her for last. He would come and check on us and spend a short time. She said he would spend a short time asking if we needed anything, checking on the children and things like that. But he never had relations with a wife if it was not her night. How many of you knew that? So what happened is one day after Asr, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to, it wasn't, I think it was Aisha's night. It was Aisha's night. So the Prophet made his rounds like he did, beginning with Sauda. And by the time he got to Salamah's house, he spent more time than normal. And Salamah was not home. She was visiting with a relative. So Aisha became jealous and suspicious, her and Hafsa. And Aisha's like, why is he spending more time over there? Salamah ain't home. So then finally, he came to her house because it was her turn. She said, and when he entered the house, she looked at him. She said, you spent more time at Salamah's home tonight. And he said, yes. He said, I was with Zaynab. And she said, without thinking, she said her jealousy got the better of her. She said, so now you're going to marry Zaynab? She said the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned around. He looked at her and she said she could see the anger in his eyes. And then his eyes began to tear up. And he said, oh, Aisha, don't you know? He said, I could never marry Zaynab. Number one, she's my stepdaughter, and Allah forbids that. And number two, he said, she's my foster daughter. Her father was the best of us, and he was my foster brother. And then she said the Prophet left. He was so angry. And she said once again, her jealousy had gotten her. She felt so bad. So that's how attached, and what the Prophet was doing at that time was teaching her the Quran. He had, she said that she found out later, and what made her feel even more bad was that when he came, Salamah wasn't there, but Zaynab had just memorized some verses of the Quran that she heard, and she recited them for the Prophet, and he was so proud of her and her being able to recite. So she said she felt really bad. Okay, so that's how attached the Prophet was to Zaynab. She was his student, his stepdaughter, and also his student. And to show how much he loved her, as if she were one of his own, one day the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to visit Salamah. It was her, turn. And he had Hassan and Hussein with him. And also Fatima, radiallahu anha, had come over. He had all three of them sitting on his lap. And he said, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, O family of the Prophet. And when Salamah heard this, she began to weep. And the Prophet asked her, why are you crying? She said, because you referred to Hassan, Hussein, and Fatima as your family, but you didn't refer to me and my daughter as this. And the Prophet came close to her and he said, don't you know you and your daughter are also from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Okay. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had this way about him. He made everyone feel special, everyone feel wanted, everyone feel needed. He raised these children. He had all these children in his home. He loved children, and all the children, he let them all know, you're all part of my family. You're all part of me. I'm your stepfather, but that means I'm your father. You're a part of me. And that's when all those hadiths came down. When Aisha flipped out about that, that's when Allah sent down the verses of the Quran saying that the stepfather is like the father and we can't marry our stepdaughters and stuff. That's when Allah sent those verses down. That's also when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained that the semen is just like the blood. He explained that a man who marries a woman, he can never marry her biological children, her biological daughters, because the semen is like the blood, just like the milk is like the blood. So fostering through suckling and semen is like blood. All that came when Aisha questioned him about Zaynab. Okay. Also, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he performed a miracle with Zaynab too. Sometimes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wake her up to pray the winter prayer with him. And to wake her up, he would sprinkle water on her face out of compassion. And Zaynab never aged. They said no matter how old she was, she lived to be in her 70s. Her face never aged. She kept this youthful, beautiful appearance. You could never tell that she was over the age of 50. And a lot of people say it's because of the miracle of the Prophet. He sprinkled water in her face. That hadith is often, all these hadiths are Bukhari, Muslim, and Muwatta. So she was beautiful, like her mother. Remember, Salamah was extremely beautiful. And she never aged. She never looked her age. She always looked young. Okay? So Zaynab, radiallahu anha, she was the student of the Prophet Muhammad. Remember, I told you guys her mother, one of the gifts of Salamah out of all the companions, none of the companions could recite the Quran with the exact tajweed of the Prophet except Salamah. Well, Zaynab inherited that. She became a scholar of the Quran. She also narrated many hadiths. She also became good friends with Aisha, guys, because her and Aisha were not that far apart in age. And remember, Aisha was a student of the Prophet too. So she learned a lot from Aisha. When Aisha found out that the Prophet could not marry her, she reached out to Zaynab. She wasn't jealous no more. And her and Zaynab became good friends because they were close in age. And they both had that photographic memory. Zaynab grew up to become a great scholar and a great judge of Medina. In fact, she was referred to as the most knowledgeable woman of her time. In fact, the renowned tabi'in, Abu Rafi, he said that whenever he mentioned a female Jurish of Medina, he always mentioned Zaynab bint Abu Salamah. She grew up, she got married. She married Abdullah ibn Zumah, who was one of her cousins. And she had 6 sons and 3 daughters. I figured y'all would want to know. But in the year of 63 AH, when the Battle of Hara occurred, she had to bear the ordeal of losing her 2 sons. Remember, I tell you guys, you see a pattern here. None of these female companions live a life of happiness. They only have increments. Moments of happiness. We can count on 2 hands our moments. Most of them can't get past 5. Her mother didn't get past 5 increments, and Zaynab didn't either, because when she grew up, what was going on at the time? She lived to see the division. This is when the companions had divided and they were fighting against each other, killing each other. She saw many people that she grew up with killed unnecessarily for stupid stuff. Okay? Relatives killed. Well, she lost 2 of her 2 sons during the Battle of Hara. And I'm going to speak about this battle a little bit. The Battle of El Hara, it was fought during the time of Yazid, who was the son of Muawiyah. He was the caliph. Okay? And this was a battle fought by him against the Ansar and the immigrants of Medina. The battle took place at the lava field of Hadrat Waqim, which is in the northeastern outskirts of Medina. And this battle only lasted less than a day. The factions of Medina disapproved of Yazid. They said that his lifestyle was impious. They accused him of wanting to live a rich life. And after declaring their rebellion, they besieged the Umayyad clan resident in Medina, and they dug a trench around the city. The army sent by Yazid, they went and confronted the rebels, and despite the advantage, the people of Medina were routed due to the defection of the tribe of Haritha, which allowed Marwan, who was Yazid's brother, to attack from the rear. During this battle, the son of Uthman was captured, and they cut his beard as a punishment, as being suspected of working with the Medinans. But Ali ibn al-Hussein, who was the son of Hussein, was treated well and brought back as a prisoner. And that's all I'm going to say about this battle, because this was a bad time during our history when the companions were fighting against each other. And I don't want people to speak badly of the companions, but anyway, this was the battle in which Zaynab's 2 sons were also killed. Many of the people of Medina were. And when they were killed, their bodies were brought to Zaynab. And when she looked at her 2 beloved sons dead, she made the same supplication that her mother made back when her mother lost her father, which was Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun, which means we belong to Allah and only to Allah do we return. This was the same supplication her mother made when she lost her father. Okay? 10 years after losing her 2 sons, that's when Zaynab died. Her funeral was conducted by Ibn Umar, who was the governor of Medina at that time. He led her funeral prayer, and she's buried in El-Baqi. And that's all we have of Zaynab. And all of this is taken directly from out of the hadiths. That's it. So that's all we know about her. She was a great scholar of Islam. She issued a lot of Islamic verdicts like Aisha, radiallahu anha. Her and Aisha were very close. She learned from Aisha as well as the prophet. Okay, but like I said, after the prophet Muhammad died, after Uthman was murdered, that's when everything went crazy. And those companions did not live in happiness, because it was always a back to that tribalism, back to that same crap of power control. All right, so I'm going to stop right here.